Today, our planet is a thriving green world inhabited by a huge variety of living things. There's life on every continent, including Antarctica, animals and plants, as well as an unimaginable number of fungi and microorganisms live in environments ranging from the most favorable to the harshest. They've adapted to survive at great depths, in mountains, deserts, and ice. To do this, they've had to travel a very long evolutionary path. In this issue, we take you on a journey from the creation of the planet to the Great Permian Extinction. To be the first to know when new videos are released, subscribe to the Age of Dinosaurs channel. You'll learn a lot of interesting things about these amazing creatures, as well as other animals that roamed our planet at different times. Our planet was formed about 4.5 billion years ago, and for most of that time, it was an extremely unfavorable place to live. It took more than 1,200,000,000 years for the first living organism to emerge. And as we know, it was in water. Land remained uninhabitable for a very long time. The first living organisms were unicellular and extremely primitive. It was another 1.7 billion years before multicellular creatures appeared. And they may have disappeared from the face of the Earth many times in the meantime. Scientists have evidence of at least 10 cataclysms that could have interrupted the evolution of life on our planet, and half of these cataclysms occurred when the Earth was inhabited by sufficiently advanced beings. The last such cataclysm occurred just 66 million years ago. It wiped out the dinosaurs and many other creatures. But first things first. For a long time after its creation, our planet was a veritable hell. Its surface was covered in oceans and molten magma. There was no atmosphere, and any kind of life was out of the question. Only after the surface cooled did the gaseous mantle in the world's oceans create the conditions that allowed the first single-celled algae and other microorganisms to appear. The earliest known extinction event occurred at this time, about 2.3 billion years ago. More advanced organisms saturated the water and atmosphere with oxygen to such an extent that they killed off all other life forms. Of course, this didn't happen overnight, but over 200 million years. But the dominance of cyanobacteria, or blue-green algae, in the wildlife of the time played a cruel joke on them. The oxygenated atmosphere not only killed off other forms of life, but also caused the onset of global glaciation. It's true that another version of the planet's transformation into a giant snowball has to do with geology. Many scientists believe that volcanic activity and the movement of lithospheric plates led to a decrease in the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. This caused the Sturt glaciation, also known as Snowball Earth. It's thought that around 700 to 750 million years ago, our planet was completely covered by a layer of ice and snow. Looking at such a world from space, it could be compared to a giant snowball. This period lasted for about 60 million years. Scientists attribute this duration to the reflective properties of ice. Most of the sun's rays were simply reflected off the planet's surface and were unable to warm it properly. The average temperature is thought to have been between -20 and -70 degrees Celsius, depending on the region and time of year. Blue-green algae themselves were able to survive this global cataclysm. Scientists believe that the melting ice shelves created more or less acceptable conditions for their existence. The microorganisms themselves had not changed much since then. They are also a very important part of all evolution on the planet. Today, blue-green algae such as Oscillatoria live in the water. They're no different in structure from the cyanobacteria that lived around 800 million years ago. These microorganisms are considered to be the ancestors of eukaryotes, living organisms with cell nuclei. They were once the most advanced organisms on the planet. They used the revolutionary technology of oxygenic photosynthesis. Unlike the anaerobic fermentation used by their competitors to obtain nutrients, cyanobacteria had an unlimited supply of raw materials. They could easily extract the reagents they needed directly from the water. However, the oxygen they produced turned out to be toxic to most other microorganisms. This led to the ecological catastrophe mentioned above. But this catastrophe was a dramatic boost to evolution. The creatures that were able to survive in the poisonous oxygen atmosphere were those that had learned to produce protective enzymes or had thick cell walls. Even cyanobacteria had to develop such walls. Some scientists even propose an unofficial name for this period: the Cenozoic era. The next step was the appearance of organisms that used oxygen to break down glucose. For example, they invented respiration. This method of degradation also proved to be more efficient and productive. These microorganisms were called proteobacteria. They were responsible for the appearance of mitochondria, the respiratory organelles of eukaryotic cells. Many modern scientists believe that the division of the cell into nucleus and cytoplasm occurred after the fusion of more ancient microorganisms with proteobacteria. This gave rise to eukaryotic cells, which became the prototype of modern cells. One example of ancient proteobacteria is Rhodospirillum, a purple spiral proteobacterium. It's the closest modern relative of mitochondria. This unique microorganism is able to use both respiration, fermentation, and oxygen-free photosynthesis, switching between them depending on environmental conditions. Undoubtedly, the presence of such a symbiont was very useful for the survival of the most ancient microorganisms, as well as for the evolution of more advanced living organisms. The fauna of the Ediacaran period undoubtedly belonged to these more advanced organisms, but towards the end of this period, about 80% of the species became extinct. Until recently, this catastrophe was not considered a mass extinction. Scientists believe that the Ediacaran biota simply gave way to more adapted life forms. However, the term Ediacaran biota is still questioned by many scientists. There's no precise understanding of whether the known organisms of this period should be classified as animals, and not so many remains of these creatures have been found to allow them to be fully studied. Those researchers who are inclined to recognize the animal world of the Ediacaran period as a separate biota divide it into three associations: Avalonian, White Sea, and nanotypes. They're defined by different periods and regions of discovery. The Ediacaran fauna includes a number of marine macroorganisms with radial and sliding symmetry. Many of them were immobile, but recent studies have shown that they're closer to animals than to plants. The Ediacaran itself lasted from 635 to 539 million years ago, but they reached their zenith about 575 million years ago, during the so-called Avalonian explosion. But around 540 to 550 million years ago, traces of life virtually disappear from the sediments of that time. Scientists have proposed a variety of reasons for the Ediacaran extinction. One of the main theories is that oxygen levels in the seawater and atmosphere dropped dramatically. This could have been caused by climatic changes, volcanic activity, and other reasons. This version is supported by the reduction in the number of small creatures and the survival of species with a large surface area. Apparently, it was easier for them to extract oxygen from the water. And then began the Paleozoic era, the first era of the Phanerozoic eon. This eon is also called the time of apparent life. It's explained by the fact that living organisms that emerged in the so-called Cambrian explosion about 500 million years ago acquired a bony skeleton. That's why so many fossils have been preserved in the fossil record. Life may have been no less diverse in the preceding period, the Ediacaran, but scientists have much less evidence of it. The Cambrian period began around 538 million years ago. At this time, all life was concentrated in the water. Most of the landmass was gathered into a single continent, Gondwana. Only small continents were separated from the general mass: Siberia, Baltica, and Laurentia, the basis of modern North America. The average air temperature on the planet was about 22 degrees Celsius. For comparison, this parameter is 14 degrees today. The oxygen content of the atmosphere did not exceed 4% at the beginning of this period. The gradual increase in the proportion of this gas in the composition of the air, according to scientists, led to a sharp increase in the diversity of the Earth's fauna. It was during the Cambrian explosion that the main groups of living things emerged. They were very different from their modern relatives. The seas and oceans of the Cambrian were inhabited by a variety of invertebrates such as worms and centipedes. Coral polyps, cephalopods, arthropods, and the first chordates were also abundant. Sponges were also abundant in the Cambrian fauna. Interestingly, these multicellular creatures may have evolved in their own way from colonies of different microorganisms. Plant life was mainly represented by macroalgae. There were also so-called bacterial mats that lived on shoals and coastal rocks. In fact, they were the first creatures to explore the land, albeit partially. It is thought that at this time, there was a separation of animals that began to hunt other creatures. The most dangerous predator in the Cambrian seas was the Anomalocaris, which we've discussed in previous editions. Many mollusks, arthropods, and chordates also adopted a predatory lifestyle. The next period, the Ordovician, was a natural continuation of the Cambrian. It lasted from 485 to 443 million years ago. Life on the seafloor continued to flourish and evolve. Trilobites, crustaceans, brachiopods, sponges, and many other animal species inhabited the seas and oceans of the Ordovician. Various echinoderms also appeared and occupied their ecological niche: starfish, budgies, lilies, and bubbles. Among the mollusks, we can distinguish a great variety of cephalopods, snails, and bivalves. Strange as it may seem, the top predators of the Ordovician were cephalopods. The underwater inhabitants were also terrorized by jawless vertebrates, and, of course, arthropods, Eurypterida and Xiphosaurida. Apparently, some of the arthropods, fleeing from their enemies, began to come ashore for a short time. This was not a full-scale conquest, just the first tentative steps into a new element, but the plants of the time had already successfully colonized the coastal strip and were actively colonizing further away from the surf line. But further land expansion was halted by another mass extinction. At the boundary between the Ordovician and Silurian periods, the seas and oceans were virtually emptied. Scientists estimate that around 60% of all life disappeared during these two extinction events. There's still no consensus on the causes of this extinction. Among the most likely possibilities is a gamma-ray burst that occurred in space near the Earth. There are also suggestions that the mass death of animals and plants could have been caused by increased volcanic activity or soil erosion with the release of various gases. The Silurian period lasted only 25 million years, but in that short time, life finally arrived on land. Coastal areas were covered with a dense carpet of mosses, lichens, and fungi. Higher plants, the rhiniophytes, also appeared, and after them, various species of arthropods began to live on land: mosses, centipedes, mites, and scorpions. At the same time, life continued to evolve in the seas and oceans, although it was not as diverse as at the time of the Cambrian explosion. Various corals and sea lilies lived on the bottom, as did mollusks, brachiopods, and ostracods. It was also at this time that the true-jawed fish, the acanthodes, appeared. It seems that the ancestors of the acanthodians appeared in the Devonian, and they were exclusively marine animals. Silurian jawed fishes also lived in freshwater. They probably fed on plankton. The largest representatives of this class reached a length of 2.5 meters. The end of this period also saw the first ray-finned fishes. The largest of these reached a length of 1 meter, and they may have been the first vertebrates that preferred to hunt other vertebrates. The Silurian period was followed by the Devonian period, which began about 419 million years ago and lasted about 60 million years. This period is sometimes called the Age of Fish. It was during the Devonian period that the placoderms appeared. They occupied almost every body of water on the planet. Sarcoptera G also appeared, giving rise to the first vertebrates to walk on land. The giant Eurypteridae occupied the bottom of the world's oceans. Perhaps the widespread distribution of these predators led to the gradual disappearance of trilobites. In the Carboniferous period that followed, the whole planet was covered with endless forests. But ferns and other primitive plants took the place of modern trees. Thanks to them, huge coal deposits appeared, giving the period its name. Among the achievements of evolution, the appearance of four-legged animals with five-toed limbs and the division of the synapsids and sauropsida are worth mentioning. The former became the ancestors of mammals, while the latter gave rise to birds and reptiles. The conflict between these different types of quadrupeds intensified during the Permian period. The last period of the Paleozoic. We've told you about the predatory Gorgonops and the hippopotamus-like Estamenosaucus, as well as other animals in our videos on the Age of Dinosaurs channel. But the greatest extinction in the history of the planet didn't allow them to conquer their evolutionary path. This gave the opportunity for new players to develop and take over the planet, dinosaurs and their relatives. But we'll talk about them in the next episodes of our channel. The creators of the channel would like to thank all viewers who watch our videos to the end. If you're interested in the history of the development of life on our planet, we recommend that you familiarize yourself with our previous publications. They tell the story of the evolution of many different species of living things, including humans. Science lovers can also learn about the problems of modern society and its complex relationship with wildlife.